Every stitch tells a story, and every story holds a memory. In the quiet town of Willowbrook, there was a little shop where lives were mended, one thread at a time. Inside this humble tailoring shop, Ana Marquez spent her days with needle and thread, not just fixing clothes, but healing hearts. Her hands worked wonders, stitching tattered fabrics back together with a magic no one could explain. Yet, even magic has its limits. The shop was her mother's dream, passed down to Ana when she was too young to understand its weight. Now, with bills piling up and time running out, Ana wondered if she had what it took to keep the dream alive. And then, one quiet evening, the bell above the door jingled softly. In walked a stranger with tired eyes and a scarf clutched tightly in his hands. "Can you fix this?" he asked, his voice carrying the faintest tremble. She didn't know it then, but saying yes would change not only his life, but her own. This is Threads of Fate, a story of kindness, love, and the threads that hold us all together. The Marquez tailoring shop sat on a quiet street corner in Willowbrook, its faded wooden signs swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, Ana Marquez worked late into the night, surrounded by stacks of fabric and the hum of her old sewing machine. To the people of Willowbrook, Ana was a miracle worker. A torn wedding dress, a beloved suit, a child's worn-out blanket. She could mend them all, as though her hands wove magic into every stitch. But lately, it seemed no amount of magic could fix her growing troubles. The shop had been her mother's dream, passed down to Ana, who worked tirelessly to keep it alive. Bills piled up, customers became fewer, and she often wondered if it was time to let go of the legacy she had fought so hard to protect. It was late, past closing time, and the little shop on Willowbrook Street was silent except for the steady hum of Ana's sewing machine. She sat at her workbench, her hands moving deftly as she repaired the hem of a child's dress. Around her, spools of thread and scraps of fabric cluttered the table, her tools of quiet magic. The bell above the door jingled, its soft chime breaking the stillness of the evening. Startled, Ana looked up, expecting one of her regulars with a last-minute request. But this time, it wasn't a familiar face. A man stepped into the shop, tall and broad-shouldered, his expression shadowed by hesitation. He carried something in his hands, a scarf, tattered and worn, its edges frayed like it had weathered many seasons. His grip on it was firm, as if letting go might cause it to vanish. Ana set aside her work and rose from her seat, her curiosity piqued. "Can I help you?" she asked gently, her voice cutting through the quiet. The man stepped forward, holding out the scarf. "Can you fix this?" he asked, his voice low, almost unsure. Ana took the scarf carefully, her fingertips brushing the faded fabric. The once bright blues and greens had softened into muted tones, but she could see the care it had been given. Every stitch carried a history, one she couldn't yet see but could almost feel. She glanced back up at him, noticing the weariness in his dark eyes. He looked like a man carrying more than just the weight of a scarf. "It belonged to my sister," he said, after a long pause. His voice caught slightly, and he looked away, as if the words themselves were hard to speak. She loved this scarf. Ana's hands lingered on the fabric as she let his words settle in the space between them. She didn't ask for more details. It wasn't her place. But she knew enough. This wasn't just any scarf. It was a piece of someone's story. She nodded, her voice soft but certain. "I'll do my best," she said. The man hesitated, as if unsure whether to leave it in her care. Finally, he let go of the scarf, his fingers loosening reluctantly. "Thank you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Anna watched him as he turned to leave, the bell jingling softly behind him. She stood there for a moment, holding the scarf in her hands, feeling its weight. Not just of fabric, but of something far deeper. She placed it carefully on her workbench and sat down again. The hum of the sewing machine returned, but her mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just a scarf to fix. It was a story to mend. For as long as anyone could remember, the Marquez tailoring shop had been a quiet corner of comfort in Willowbrook. It wasn't just a place to mend clothes. It was where memories were kept alive and stories were shared. The week after the man with the scarf visited, Anna's shop saw its usual flow of customers. Each one brought with them not just fabric to repair, but a glimpse into their lives, a thread in the larger tapestry of the town. Mrs. Hines was one of Anna's regulars, a retired schoolteacher in her late 60s. She walked in one morning with a folded suit draped over her arm, her movements slow but purposeful. "Good morning, Anna," she said with a warm smile. Anna smiled back, setting down her sewing. "Good morning, Mrs. Hines. What can I do for you today?" The older woman carefully laid the suit on the counter. It was a deep navy blue, with small frayed edges at the cuffs and lapel. "This belonged to my husband," Mrs. Hines said, her voice soft. "He wore it every year for our anniversary dinner. I found it tucked away in the closet and, well, I'd like to see it mended." Anna nodded, her hands gently running over the fabric. "Of course, it's a beautiful suit. I'll make sure it's good as new." Mrs. Hines's smile faltered for a moment, her eyes glistening. "He always said it made him feel like a young man again," she said. Then, after a pause, "He's been gone for 5 years now, but restoring this suit might make me feel close to him again, like the good old days." Anna's heart ached at the tenderness in Mrs. Hines's words. "I'll take good care of it," she said softly. As Mrs. Hines left, the suit in Anna's hands felt heavier than its fabric, weighted with love, loss, and memory. Later that week, the shop door opened again, and a young girl peeked in hesitantly. It was Maya, a shy teenager who Anna recognized from her walks to the library. She carried a rolled-up piece of paper and clutched it tightly as if it might escape. "Hi. Are you busy?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Anna smiled warmly. "Not at all. Come in." Maya stepped forward, unrolling the paper to reveal a hand-drawn sketch of a dress. It was simple but beautiful, with flowing lines and intricate details. I was wondering if you could help me make this," Maya said, her cheeks turning pink. "It's for prom. I want to make something special, but I don't really know how." Anna studied the sketch, her smile growing. "This is a wonderful design. You have a real eye for detail." Maya's eyes widened in surprise. "You think so?" Anna nodded. "Absolutely. Why don't we work on this together? I'll help you bring it to life." For the first time, Maya smiled, a shy, hopeful smile that lit up her face. Over the next few days, Maya returned often, helping Anna choose fabrics and learning how to sew small pieces. With every visit, her confidence grew, and so did her bond with Anna. By the time the dress was finished, it wasn't just a garment. It was a symbol of a young girl discovering her strength. Another visitor came later in the week, a man named Mark, carrying a jacket that had clearly seen better days. His young daughter trailed behind him, clutching a notebook and scribbling as they walked. "Morning, Anna," Mark said with an easy grin. "Got a tough one for you?" Anna chuckled, taking the jacket from him. "This jacket's been through a lot, hasn't it?" Mark nodded. "Yeah, it's my favorite. My daughter Holly says I should just buy a new one, but I don't know. I kind of like this one." Holly looked up from her notebook, rolling her eyes playfully. "It's practically falling apart, Dad." Mark laughed. "That's why we're here. If anyone can save it, it's Anna." As Anna examined the jacket, she noticed the faint initials embroidered on the inside lining, MR. She smiled, realizing it wasn't just a jacket. It was part of Mark's story. "Leave it with me," she said. "I'll make it look good as new." When Mark returned to pick it up, he slipped on the jacket and looked at his daughter. "What do you think, Holly?" he asked. Holly smiled, giving him a thumbs up. "You look awesome, Dad." For Mark, it wasn't just about the jacket. It was about being a father his daughter could look up to. Anna had worked on many delicate pieces in her time, but there was something different about this scarf. It wasn't just the frayed edges or faded colors. It was the feeling it carried, as though every thread held a story waiting to be told. Late one evening, after the shop had closed and the quiet hum of her sewing machine was the only sound, Anna ran her fingers over the fabric, searching for the best way to restore it. That's when she felt it, something small and crumpled tucked into one of the folds. Frowning, she carefully unfolded the scarf and found a slip of paper, yellowed with age and barely larger than her palm. It had been hidden so deeply that it must have been there for years, unnoticed by anyone who had worn it. Her heart quickened as she smoothed the paper flat. The handwriting was faint and uneven, as if written in a hurry, but the words were clear. "Ben, don't forget what we talked about. If you ever feel lost, come find me. You'll know where to look." Anna stared at the note, her mind racing. Who had written it? And what had they meant? She turned it over, searching for more clues, but the paper was blank on the other side. She set the scarf and the note down on her workbench, her thoughts swirling. It felt like she had stumbled onto something deeply personal, a piece of someone's story that wasn't hers to uncover. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this note mattered, that it was meant to be found. Anna worked tirelessly, her hands moving deftly from one garment to the next. Yet, no matter how focused she tried to be, her thoughts kept drifting back to the scarf she had promised to mend. Each time her fingers brushed its frayed edges, she couldn't help but think of the man who had entrusted it to her. His voice had carried a quiet ache, his eyes a weight of untold sorrow. And then there was the note she had discovered, its words lingering in her mind like an unsolved puzzle. It wasn't until late Friday evening that the bell above the door jingled softly again. Anna looked up to see Ben standing in the doorway, his hands shoved into the pockets of his coat. "Hi," he said, his voice tentative. "Hi," Anna replied, setting aside her work. She gestured to the counter. "I was just finishing up your scarf." Ben stepped forward as Anna pulled the scarf from a drawer. She had repaired its frayed edges, carefully rethreading the loose stitching. But she'd done more than that. Along one corner, she'd embroidered a small detail, a cluster of daisies, subtle yet vibrant, stitched in soft white and yellow thread. Ben's breath caught as he took the scarf in his hands. Daisies, he murmured. They were her favorite. Anna hesitated. I hope it's okay, she said. I thought it might make it feel more like her. Ben nodded, his voice thick. It's perfect. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, Ben began to talk. Kate was my sister, he said. She passed away last year. This scarf, it was her comfort blanket, you know. She always wore it when things got hard. When I lost her, it was like I lost a part of myself. Anna listened, her heart aching at his words. She wanted to say something comforting, but she knew that sometimes the best thing you could do was simply listen. Ben smiled faintly, brushing his fingers over the embroidered daisies. Thank you, Anna, for giving me a little piece of her back. Anna reached for the folded note on the counter and held it out to him. I found this when I was repairing the scarf, she said softly. I thought you might want to see it. Ben took the note, his brows knitting together as he read the words. For a long moment, he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up, his voice quiet. I don't know what this means, he said, but it's her handwriting. It's Kate's. Anna's heart ached at the grief in his voice. Do you remember what she might have meant? A place, maybe? Ben shook his head slowly, staring down at the note as though it might reveal more if he looked hard enough. I don't know, but she and I used to have this thing when we were kids. We'd bury little time capsules in the park near our house. She always said we should leave parts of our story behind, just in case we needed to find them again. Anna tilted her head, intrigued. Do you think there could be something there? Ben hesitated, his fingers brushing over the words on the note. Then he nodded. Maybe. It's worth a look. For a moment, Anna hesitated. This wasn't her story, and yet she felt a strange connection to it, like she was meant to help. I'll come with you if you'd like, she offered. Ben glanced at her, surprised, but then his expression softened. I'd like that, he said. As the two of them prepared to leave, scarf and note in hand, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a childhood memory. It was a thread, leading them both to something they couldn't yet see. What had Kate left behind? And why did she hide this message so carefully? The answers lay ahead, buried in a time capsule from the past, waiting to be uncovered. The park where Ben and Kate had spent their childhood was still there, though the years had changed it. The trees were taller, their branches twisting high into the sky, and the playground was now faded and rusted. But as Ben and Anna stepped onto the soft earth, there was a sense of familiarity, a feeling that this place held something they had both been searching for, even if they didn't know it yet. They walked in silence, Ben clutching the scarf in one hand and the note in the other. Anna followed closely, her heart beating faster with every step. It should be around here, Ben said quietly, leading her to a grove of trees near the edge of the park. We used to bury them under that old oak. It was her favorite spot. The tree was still there, its gnarled roots breaking through the soil like ancient fingers. Ben knelt down, running his hand over the ground as if searching for a memory. "I hope it's still here," he murmured. They began digging together, their hands working quickly to pull away the dirt. The minutes stretched on, and Anna could feel Ben's frustration growing. "What if it's gone?" he said, his voice tinged with despair. "What if this was all for nothing?" Anna placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not for nothing," she said gently. "Even if we don't find it, this matters. You're here. You're trying." Ben looked at her, his expression softening. He nodded, then kept digging. Finally, their hands hit something solid, a small metal box, rusted at the edges but intact. Ben froze, staring at it as though it might disappear if he moved too quickly. "It's here," he whispered. Anna smiled. "Go ahead, open it." With trembling hands, Ben lifted the box from the earth and pried it open. Inside, nestled among scraps of paper and trinkets from their childhood, was a small leather journal with Kate's name written on the cover. Ben opened the journal carefully, his fingers brushing over the familiar handwriting. The first few pages were filled with Kate's thoughts, simple moments, childhood memories, dreams for the future. But as he turned the pages, he found a letter addressed to him. "Ben," it began, "I don't know when you'll find this, but I hope it's at a time when you need it most. I always said we should leave parts of our story behind, just in case. This is my part, something to remind you of the things that matter." Ben's hands trembled as he read aloud. Anna listened in silence, her chest tightening at the raw emotion in his voice. "You've always been the strong one," the letter continued, "even when you didn't feel like it. But strength isn't just about carrying the weight of the world. It's about letting go when you need to, about letting others help you. I hope you know it's okay to lean on people. It's okay to keep living, even after loss." Ben paused, his voice breaking. Anna reached out, placing her hand over his. "There's more," she said softly. He nodded, clearing his throat, and kept reading. "I want you to know that I'm proud of you, no matter where life takes you. And if you ever feel lost, remember this: you're not alone. You never have been." The letter ended simply, but its words lingered in the air. Ben closed the journal, his tears falling freely now. "I didn't know I needed to hear that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Anna smiled, her own eyes glistening. Sometimes we don't know what we need until we find it. They left the park as the sun began to set, the journal tucked safely under Ben's arm and the scarf wrapped around his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, Ben felt lighter, like the weight he'd been carrying had begun to lift. He glanced at Anna as they walked, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. Anna smiled. "For what?" "For helping me find this. For being here." They walked in comfortable silence back to the shop, the glow of the streetlights guiding their way. When they arrived, Anna paused before unlocking the door. "You know," she said, "I think Kate would be proud of you, of everything you've done to honor her." Ben smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth lifting in a way that felt like the beginning of something new. Ben and Anna search for a box buried under an old oak tree, Kate's favorite spot in the park. Inside the box, they find a journal filled with Kate's memories and a heartfelt letter to Ben. The letter encourages him to let go of his grief, accept help, and embrace life again. Deeply moved, Ben realizes how much he needed Kate's words. As they leave the park, lighter and closer than before. Anna reassures Ben that Kate would be proud of him. The familiar chime of the bell above the shop door greeted Anna as she stepped inside, the scent of lavender and aged wood wrapping around her like an old friend. It was early morning the next day, and the soft amber light of the sun slanted through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the hardwood floor. Her hands brushed against the fabric on the counter, a soft organza for a little girl's birthday dress. The shop had always felt alive to Anna, each spool of thread and rack of garments whispering the stories they held. But today, it felt heavier, like the shop itself shared her unspoken burden. Kate's message lingered in her mind like a half-remembered melody. You don't always have to be strong alone. It echoed in Ben's words too, the way he admitted he needed to hear those exact words that day. Anna had smiled for him, offered reassurance, but now that she was alone, the walls felt too close, her breaths uneven. She pressed her palm against the counter, her mind drifting to memories of her mother bustling around the shop. She could almost hear her voice. A dress isn't just fabric, Anna. It's hope. A girl sees herself as beautiful. A bride takes her first steps into a new life. A widow remembers that she can still shine. We don't just sew stitches, we mend souls. Anna swallowed hard. Her mother's voice had always been her compass, especially after she'd passed. This shop wasn't just four walls. It was a legacy, a lifeline between her past and present. But lately, it felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She glanced at the ledger tucked beneath the counter. The numbers stared back at her, cold and unfeeling, a stark contrast to the warmth of the shop. She hated looking at them because they only told one story, one she wasn't ready to admit. The bills were piling up. Supplies were costing more. And though her clients adored her work, many could barely afford her services. Anna had never had the heart to charge what her creations were worth. Her throat tightened as she thought of Maya earlier this week, standing in the shop in her hand-sewn prom gown. The young girl had twirled in front of the mirror, her laughter ringing out like a melody. Anna had stitched every seam with care, knowing how much this night meant to her. Maya had helped too, her eager hands pinning fabric and threading needles under Anna's patient guidance. I want to learn, Maya had said, her eyes sparkling with determination, so I can make my own someday. Anna had smiled at her, seeing a bit of herself in the girl's excitement. They had worked side by side, and by the end, Maya's joy was as much about the process as it was about the finished gown. Her eyes had shone with happiness, the kind Anna had hoped to give her when she agreed to take on the project, despite knowing the family's financial struggles. Later that evening, Maya's mother had come by. She'd stood at the counter with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, her gratitude spilling out in broken whispers. "Thank you," she had said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've made her feel so beautiful, so special. I don't know how to repay you." Anna had waved her off gently, reassuring her that it was enough to see Maya's joy. But the woman had gripped her hand tightly and promised through her tears, "I will repay you, Anna. I swear I will." The memory lingered, both warm and bittersweet. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. But love didn't pay the electricity bill. And as much as Anna wanted to believe in promises and gratitude, she couldn't ignore the mounting pressure that weighed her down like an invisible anchor. "Mama, do I have to let go?" she whispered to the empty shop. Her voice trembled as she said it aloud. the weight of the question pressing against her chest. She sank onto the old stool by the counter and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a faded photograph of her mother and herself, taken on the shop's opening day. Anna had been only 7, her hands gripping a little dress they'd made together. Her mother had her arm around Anna, her smile wide and full of pride. The memory of that day came rushing back. The smell of fresh paint, her mother's laugh as they celebrated with lemon tarts, and Anna's beaming pride when her mother said, "This dress will make someone feel special. You made that happen, Anna." Her fingers tightened around the photograph as tears pricked her eyes. She wanted to believe her mother would understand, but the thought of letting the shop go felt like failing her, like losing a piece of her own heart. Yet deep down, Anna knew she couldn't keep this up forever. She was one person carrying the weight of a dream that had grown too big to bear alone. The love she had for the shop didn't make the burden any lighter. As Anna tidied the counter, stacking spools of thread and straightening a pile of neatly folded fabric, her thoughts lingered on the weight of the day. Her mother's photograph still sat tucked in the drawer, a quiet reminder of what she was holding on to and how much of it felt like it was slipping away. She sighed, moving to her sewing machine and pressing the pedal. The rhythmic hum filled the shop, grounding her as she focused on a few leftover stitches from an earlier project. Her hands worked automatically, but her mind wandered to Kate's words in the park, and Ben, his quiet, unexpected vulnerability. The bell above the door chimed, breaking through her thoughts. She glanced up and froze. It was Ben. He stood in the doorway, the soft morning light spilling in behind him, illuminating his figure. But it wasn't just the fact that he was there. It was the smile on his face. Ben never smiled, at least not like this. Every other time he'd walked into the shop, he'd carried a sort of quiet intensity, a weight that made him seem untouchable. But now, his lips curved into a warm, easy smile that softened the edges of his face, reaching his eyes with a glimmer of something lighter. Anna blinked, her heart skipping a beat as an unwelcome thought barged into her mind, loud and clear. He's handsome. Her eyes widened, and she immediately looked back down at her sewing, her cheeks burning. Where did that come from? She adjusted the fabric, pretending to focus on the thread as her brain spiraled. It's just a smile, Anna. A smile. Why does it suddenly feel like my thoughts are shouting? She bit her lip, mortified, even though she knew there was no way he could hear her ridiculous inner monologue. Ben approached the counter, his boots tapping softly against the wooden floor. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with a curious look. Everything all right? Yes, she said quickly, her voice a bit too bright. She cleared her throat, scrambling to sound normal. Yes, fine, great, just, focused. She gestured vaguely at her machine. Ben's brow quirked slightly, but the faint smile on his lips didn't falter. I wasn't sure if now was a good time. It's a shop, Anna, she thought wryly. Of course now is a good time. She resisted the urge to roll her eyes at herself, and instead gave him a crooked smile. Well, the crowds have been overwhelming today, she said dryly, gesturing around the very empty shop. But I think I can squeeze you in, wheeze you. Ben chuckled softly, the sound low and rich. That's good to know, he said. He hesitated for just a second, slipping his hands into his pockets before speaking again. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me tonight, he said, his tone confident but warm. Anna blinked, her sarcasm suddenly evaporating. If you're free, of course, he added smoothly, the faintest hint of something softer in his eyes. She glanced at the fabric-strewn counter, lifting a stray spool of thread in mock seriousness. "Oh, well, as you can see, I'm absolutely drowning in work," she said, deadpan. "I barely have time to breathe." Ben's lips twitched, his smile widening slightly. Anna sighed dramatically, setting the thread down. "But," she said, a warm smile breaking through her teasing, "I think I can make an exception." 7 o'clock, he asked, his tone casual but with an undeniable glimmer of satisfaction. 7 works, Anna replied, nodding. He lingered for a moment, his gaze holding hers, before turning to leave. The bell chimed softly as he stepped out into the morning light, the door clicking shut behind him. As the shop fell quiet again, Anna sank into her seat at the sewing machine, her thoughts swirling. What just happened? She thought, pressing her lips together to stifle the grin tugging at her mouth. Her cheeks were still warm, and that stupid, traitorous thought, he's handsome, refused to leave her alone. She buried her face in her hands for a moment, groaning softly to herself. "Get it together," she muttered, though a small, giddy laugh escaped anyway. Even as she tried to refocus on her work, she couldn't shake the way his smile had felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Anna stood in front of the mirror in her small bedroom, a half-empty closet spilling onto the bed behind her. Dresses were draped over the back of a chair, a rejected pair of heels lay on the floor, and Anna's expression was somewhere between amusement and frustration. She didn't go out much, not since taking over the shop. Invitations had grown sparse, and the idea of being invited to dinner, a proper dinner, was something she'd stopped imagining a while ago. She sighed, tugging at the hem of a... By the time she arrived at the restaurant, Anna was feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. The place was Willowbrook's finest, a warm, ambient restaurant with soft lighting and elegant decor. Anna didn't visit places like this. Through the large window, she saw Ben already seated, looking calm and composed. When he spotted her, he stood, a small smile pulling at his lips. "You made it," he said warmly as she approached. "You didn't make that hard to do," she teased lightly, gesturing at the grand restaurant. "This is a bit fancier than I expected." Ben chuckled. "Only the best." Once seated, the tension Anna had felt earlier began to ebb. The conversation flowed easily, about little things at first, memories of the park, funny stories from the shop. But as the evening unfolded, Anna found herself relaxing more than she'd expected. She talked about the shop, how much she loved it, but also how much it was weighing her down. She admitted things she hadn't even fully acknowledged to herself, how she felt like she was running in circles trying to keep it open, how she didn't know if she could hold on to it much longer. Ben listened intently, his brow furrowing slightly as she spoke. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix things. He just listened. When she finished, he leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Anna, what you're doing, it matters. It's more than just a shop. It's your heart. And that's why people see it as more than a business. They see you." His words landed gently but deeply, and for a moment, Anna felt the tightness in her chest ease. The rest of the dinner was lighter, shared stories, easy laughter, and a connection that felt effortless. When they stepped out into the cool night air, Ben offered to walk her home. The streets of Willowbrook were quiet, the faint glow of streetlights casting long shadows as they strolled. They stopped in front of her door, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts. "Thank you," Anna said softly. "For tonight. I needed this." Ben smiled, his hands in his pockets. "So did I." Their eyes met, and for a moment, it felt like time had paused. There was a closeness, a warmth that hadn't been there before. But neither moved. "Good night, Anna," Ben said finally, his voice just above a whisper. "Good night, Ben," she replied, her lips curling into a soft smile as she stepped inside, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. As the door clicked shut, she leaned against it, her mind swirling with thoughts she wasn't ready to name. The soft glow of mid-afternoon sunlight filtered into the shop, painting the floor in golden hues as Anna handed a carefully wrapped garment to her last customer of the day. "Thank you so much, Anna," the woman said, her voice warm. "You've outdone yourself again." Anna smiled, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. "I'm glad you like it. Let me know if there's anything else you need." The bell above the door jingled as the woman left, her figure disappearing into the bustling street outside. Anna glanced at the clock on the wall. Another day almost done. She stretched lightly, her body still carrying a pleasant weariness from the night before. Dinner with Ben. Her thoughts flickered back to the easy laughter, the way he'd listened so intently when she'd opened up about the shop. She'd barely slept, her mind running over everything they'd talked about and the strange warmth that had lingered long after he'd walked her home. The bell chimed again, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned toward the door, and there he was. Ben. It felt surreal, seeing him again so soon. He stood in the doorway, the sunlight spilling in behind him, and then he smiled. That same warm, effortless smile that had been haunting her since the night before. That smile. Seriously, Brain? Not again. Anna glanced away quickly, pretending to fuss with a nearby spool of thread, her heart doing a little flip. "Hey," Ben said as he stepped inside, his voice calm but warm. "Hey," Anna replied, her tone deliberately casual. "You're cutting it close. I was just about to close up." Ben chuckled softly, taking a few steps toward her. "Good timing then. I wanted to talk to you about something." Curiosity flickered in Anna's eyes. "Oh?" She walked to the door, flipping the sign to closed and locking it before turning back to him. "All right, let's talk. Come on. It's a mess back there, but we'll have more privacy." Anna led him into the back room, where the chaos of her workday was on full display. Bolts of fabric leaned against the walls, sewing patterns were scattered across tables, and spools of thread cluttered every surface. Ben took it all in, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "Wow, this is a lot." Anna laughed lightly, shoving some patterns aside to clear a space. "It's organized chaos. Have a seat." Ben sat down, his posture relaxed but his eyes serious. Anna leaned against a table, crossing her arms. "So, what's on your mind?" Ben hesitated for only a moment before leaning forward. "I've been thinking about the shop," he said. Anna blinked, a little surprised. "The shop?" "Yeah," he replied. "And what you said last night, about how hard it's been to keep it going. I think there's a way to change that. To get more people to see what you're doing here." Anna tilted her head, intrigued but cautious. "I'm listening." Ben's face lit up with the same quiet enthusiasm she'd seen flashes of before. "I organize events all the time at the school. Sports days, fundraisers, family activities. And I was thinking, what if we did something like that for your shop?" Anna raised an eyebrow, a teasing glint in her eyes. A sports day for sewing? Ben chuckled, shaking his head. Not quite. I mean events that bring people together. Family crafting nights here in the shop. You could teach parents and kids how to sew. Simple stuff, like fixing buttons or making small projects. Seasonal workshops for holiday decorations or costumes. And he hesitated briefly. You could even come to the school, show the kids what you do. Some of them might love it. Anna stared at him, her mind racing to keep up. You really think people would be interested in that? I know they would, Ben said, his tone confident. You're not just selling clothes, Anna. You're creating something special. People just need to see it. And you, I think this could work. Anna's arms dropped to her sides as she processed his words. It felt big, too big, maybe, but also possible. And it had been a long time since she'd felt that kind of possibility. And you'd help with this? She asked cautiously. Ben nodded without hesitation. I'd handle the logistics, help spread the word, and even help run the events if you want. It's what I do, organizing stuff. You just need to say yes. Anna let out a soft laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. I don't even know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Ben replied with a small smile. Anna smiled back, the warmth in her chest undeniable. Okay, I'll think about it. Ben stood, brushing his hands on his jeans as he glanced around the room again. Good. Because I think this place could be something amazing. As they walked back to the front of the shop, Anna's mind buzzed with the possibilities Ben had laid out. It was overwhelming, sure. It felt like maybe, just maybe, things could change. Thanks, Ben, she said softly, her voice carrying a sincerity she hoped he could hear. He smiled again, and this time Anna didn't look away. Anytime, he said, his tone as steady as ever. As the door closed behind him, Anna leaned against the counter, her thoughts a mix of hope and uncertainty. The night before had left her with questions about what might come next. But today, she felt like she wasn't facing those questions alone. The days after Ben's visit became a whirlwind for Anna. The initial spark he had given her, the idea of events and workshops, had lit a fire she hadn't realized was there. Now, she was full of ideas, sketching notes late into the night and waking up with more to add. She was at the counter one morning, scribbling furiously in her notebook, when Ben walked in, a cup of coffee in each hand. Morning, he said, setting one cup down in front of her. You've been busy. You have no idea, Anna replied, her eyes bright. Ben leaned over the counter, scanning the page. A smile spread across his face. I think you're onto something. And, Anna continued, barely pausing to breathe, I was thinking about teaming up with local businesses for cross-promotions. Like, we could offer a discount to customers who donate fabric or supplies. And I've already started working on some promotional flyers to hand out at the school. She tapped a pile of colorful mock-ups on the counter. Ben raised an eyebrow, impressed. You've been busy, he repeated, his tone warm. Once I started, the ideas just kept coming, Anna admitted, brushing a stray curl out of her face. I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner. People want experiences, right? And if they leave here with something they made themselves, they'll remember it. They'll talk about it. Ben nodded, his eyes fixed on her with quiet admiration. Exactly. You're making the shop more than a place to buy things. You're making it part of the community. The words settled over Anna, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of them. Part of the community. That was what her mother had always wanted for the shop. Over the next week, the shop became a hive of activity. Anna spent her mornings sewing and serving customers, her afternoons preparing for the first event, and her evenings turning her ideas into reality. The first workshop, Upcycle Your Wardrobe, was set for Saturday, and Anna threw herself into making sure every detail was perfect. She cleared a section of the shop for crafting tables, hung up colorful banners she'd made herself, and even stitched together small fabric kits for participants. Ben helped when he could, moving tables and brainstorming with her, but it was clear to both of them that this was Anna's vision now. "You've got this," Ben said as they stood in the shop on Friday night, admiring the setup. "I hope so," Anna replied, her voice tinged with nervous excitement. The next morning, Anna opened the door to find a small line of people waiting outside, families clutching bags of old clothes, curious faces peeking in. Among them, Anna recognized a few familiar faces: Maya and her mother, Mrs. Amina, with wide smiles and a bag bursting with old denim; Mark standing beside his daughter Holly, who clutched her notebook tightly; and Mrs. Hines, trying to corral her 3 energetic grandchildren, each holding fabric scraps in their tiny fists. "Welcome," Anna said, her nerves dissolving into a smile as she ushered them inside. The day was a success. Parents and children crowded around tables, learning how to sew patches and create simple designs. Anna moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement. "See," she said to Maya as the young girl worked intently on stitching a colorful patch onto her old backpack. "That's perfect. Your stitches are so neat." Maya grinned proudly, and her mother, Mrs. Amina, leaned over with a fond smile. "She's been excited about this all week," she whispered to Anna. "Thank you for organizing it." At another table, Mark sat beside Holly, helping her trace a flower design onto fabric. "I think it'll look great on your bag," he said. "Better than your old jacket," Holly teased, glancing up from her notebook. Mark chuckled. "Probably, but I like my jacket just fine now. Right, Anna?" Anna laughed as she passed by their table. "It's holding up pretty well thanks to you, Mark. You're getting the hang of this." Nearby, Mrs. Hines was trying to keep her lively grandchildren focused as they darted between the tables. "Grandma, look!" one of them exclaimed, waving a piece of fabric shaped like a star. Anna crouched beside them, helping the little boy position the fabric on a tote bag. "Let's stitch this right here," she said with a smile. The shop buzzed with laughter and chatter all day, and even Ben seemed to be in his element, floating through the shop to make sure everything ran smoothly. But it was clear to anyone watching that Anna was at the center of it all. By the end of the day, as the last participants filed out, Anna sat down at one of the crafting tables, exhausted but exhilarated. Mrs. Hines waved from the door, her grandchildren bouncing with excitement. "This was wonderful, Anna," she said. "I hope you'll do it again soon." Mark and Holly were next, lingering for a moment. "Thank you," Mark said quietly, his voice carrying a depth that made Anna pause. This meant a lot to her, to both of us. Holly looked up at Anna, her notebook clutched close. "I think I might make something like this at home," she said shyly. Anna smiled, her chest warming. "You should. I'd love to see what you make, Holly." As the door closed for the last time, Anna let out a breath and leaned back in her chair. The shop, though quieter now, still held the warmth and energy of the day. "Ready to start planning the next one?" Ben asked as he walked over, his voice laced with humor. Anna laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I think I need a minute first. But in her heart, she already knew this was just the beginning. The cheers of the children still echoed in Anna's ears as she and Ben stepped out of the school. The sewing demonstration had been a resounding success. The kids had laughed, learned, and even asked Anna questions about how she started her craft. Parents who had come to pick them up lingered to chat, and the headmistress, a cheerful woman with a warm smile, had clapped her hands together as she invited Anna back. "Oh, Anna," she had said brightly, "the children adored you. I can't thank you enough for coming. Let's get you back here next month, shall we? Maybe even a sewing club." Anna had nodded, still a little stunned by the reception. "I'd love that," she had managed to say, her heart full. Now, as she and Ben walked toward a small cafe near the school, Anna could barely contain her excitement. "I still can't believe it," she said, her voice brimming with joy. "They actually want me back. Did you see how excited those kids were?" "I saw," Ben replied, his tone warm and steady. "They loved you." Anna laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I mean, I love the shop, but today was different. Seeing their faces light up, realizing I could actually inspire them. It's surreal." "It's not surreal," Ben said, his lips curving into a smile as he held the cafe door open for her. "It's you. You make things happen." After grabbing something simple to eat, they decided to take a stroll, the golden hues of the setting sun casting long shadows on the quiet streets. Anna barely noticed her surroundings as she talked animatedly about the headmistress's feedback, ideas for the next workshop, and even how a few parents had asked her about private sewing classes. Her voice was light, her steps almost bouncing with joy. Ben walked beside her, quieter than usual, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. His gaze, however, wasn't on the path ahead. It was on her. He watched the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her dreams, the way her lips curved into an uncontainable smile, the way her entire presence seemed lighter, freer, like she was finally stepping into a world she'd always deserved. She was radiant, and for the first time, Ben didn't bother trying to hide how he felt. The two of them wandered into the park, the same one where their journey together had truly begun. The air was cooler now, the faint rustling of leaves punctuated by the distant sound of children playing. As they walked, the towering oak tree came into view, its sprawling roots bathed in the amber glow of the fading sun. Anna paused beneath the tree, resting her hand lightly on its trunk. "It feels like forever ago that we came here," she said softly, her voice taking on a reflective tone. "Digging up that box, reading Kate's letter. It feels like it changed everything." "It did," Ben said quietly, stepping closer. Anna turned to look at him, her face lit by the golden light. "For you?" "For me," he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. He hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts, before continuing. "But not just because of the capsule. Because of you." Anna blinked, her breath catching slightly as she searched his face. "You came into my life when I didn't know I needed someone," Ben said, his voice raw, his gaze unwavering. "And every day since then, the thought of seeing you, of hearing your laugh, of watching you light up when you talk about your work, it's made my days brighter. You've made me brighter." The words hung between them, fragile yet powerful. Anna's heart raced as she held his gaze, every part of her wanting to look away and yet unable to. She couldn't deny it anymore. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke, the way her heart felt like it was about to burst. It was all real. "Ben," she whispered, her voice trembling. But she didn't need to say more. He stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth of him even in the cool evening air. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch gentle but deliberate. Anna closed the gap between them, her heart pounding in her chest. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative, but quickly deepened into something that spoke of everything they hadn't said. Every look, every smile, every unspoken moment finally given a voice. When they pulled apart, the world around them seemed to stand still. Ben smiled, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "I've wanted to do that for a while," he murmured. Anna laughed softly, her cheeks flushing. "Me too." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in a dusky glow. For a moment, they simply stood there, the weight of their shared journey and newfound connection settling between them like a promise. Sometimes life gives us threads of hope when we least expect it. In the hands of the right people, those threads can weave something beautiful. For Anna and Ben, it wasn't just about mending broken pieces. It was about creating something new together. Because love, like the best stitches, holds everything together.